back to Ingenomics. The discussion on foreign investment in the retail sector has many facets, but I'm going to stick to one narrow issue today. Will it make a difference to food inflation? And joining me is a man who would know the sector inside out, Bijoy Kurien, the head of Reliance Retail. Mr. Kurien, thank you very much for joining us. Well, first up,
welcome.
Before I get into foreign retailers, basically what does modern retail bring to the table by way of cheaper food prices? Really, is it just cutting out middlemen, or is it actually something much deeper, fomenting a symbiotic relation with food producers?
Well, I think it's that those two that you have mentioned, as well as several things more. One, of course, is the moment you access the access the farm producers directly, you end up in a situation where you're able to access quality produce directly from the farms. And when you cut out the intermediaries, you actually are able to do that at costs which are lower than what you currently pay for. The second thing is in terms of hygiene and freshness, and both of these are possibilities when you look at the supply chain and the infrastructure that a modern retailer can bring compared to what you currently have in the form of intermediaries. So that is the second part of it. And the third is in terms of modern farm practices. And modern farm practices which can be, let's say, a relationship and an education process between, say, the retailer, university or another agricultural body and the farmers is the third area where there can be benefits in terms of improving the quality and the yield.
I noticed that you're not, you haven't said much about food prices itself. At least several policymakers, Dr. Kaushik Basu, the RBI governor, are all looking at foreign investment in modern retail, really modern retail, as perhaps being able to bring down food prices. And yet, in the last 3 years, when we have had some presence of modern retail, that is when actually food prices have shot up much more. What is not working here?
Well, I think food inflation is a slightly different issue. Food inflation, actually, if you look at India today, one of the challenges that we are facing is the fact that as we grow richer as a nation, our demand for food is also increasing. Our protein intakes are also increasing. With the increase, if you really look at food inflation today, it's not so much for, fruits and vegetables which have actually driven food inflation, but it's actually protein price inflation which has driven food inflation. So that's the first thing that we need to remember. The second part of it is that currently what we have is we have the APMC Act, and the APMC Act exists in its prehistoric form in many of the states and in the more modern form in some of the states. Under the more modern form, what can happen is that retailers can actually access the farmers directly, which is that they can actually buy produce directly from the farms. The second thing that they can do is that they can actually enter into contracts with farmers which will guarantee prices which they will pay to the farmer for the produce that the farmer actually creates in the future. And the third part is that in terms of contract farming. So if you really look at farm sector reforms, there are several issues at the state level which certainly need to be tackled even before a retailer can access the supplier who's the farmer. In some states, a retailer cannot buy land, or even a corporate for that matter cannot buy land, or rather an individual who is not an agriculturalist cannot buy land. So in which case what happens is that corporate farming is certainly ruled out. In some states you can't buy directly from the farmer, and if you can't buy directly from the farmer, then the whole supply chain principle, which is founded on the fact that you're accessing produce directly from the farmer, gets completely defeated. So you have to remember that there are issues which relate to the access, which are actually limiting the access to the farm for the retailer, and these issues certainly will limit the ability of farmers to first to be able to connect directly with retailers, and certainly retailers to build robust supply chains.
Okay, now let me get the foreign element in. I mean, what is it that the foreign retailer can bring which is extra? I mean, we are told about cold chains and storage facilities. Surely this can't be great know-how, and it can't require so much of money that a Reliance can't bring to the table. Will there be anything at all better that can be done by the foreign investor? Mind you, I'm not against it. I'm only wondering if there's anything more that can be accessed if it is thrown open to the Walmarts of the world.
Well, I think it's a question of what the domestic retailers can do. What you can see is that there might be a Reliance which might be able to do a lot of this, but there are several domestic retailers who currently have expanded quite significantly and consequently are constrained in terms of how much they can actually invest. This requires investment. I think where the government is seeing this is that in case it were to invite foreign investment into the retail sector, and when it can specify a clause which states that 50% of this investment has to be in the back end, then it can actually channel investment into this particular part, which is the back end which is connecting the farmer to the store, and that will help to be able to create much greater efficiencies as well as serve the needs and priorities of the government. And I think that is where they're looking at foreign investment to come in. You already have a fair number of domestic players in the market today. If you look at all the big business houses, they're all in the retail industry. The Tatas are there with Trent, you have you have Reliance Group there, you have the Future Group there, you have the Bharti Group, you have the Birla Group, so all of them are actually...
You have a couple of foreigners in the back end as well.
Yes, that's right. So they're hoping that in case you are able to do this, then it will certainly create a connect between the retail store as well as the farmer, and by putting in the clause, it will also force them to invest in the back end. Currently, for example, if you were to just look at back end infrastructure, which is what is defined by the government in the recent budget, it talks about, let's say, post-harvest facilities, cold storages, cold chains, and all of this qualify as infrastructure as far as the back end is concerned. And banks then will give you loans on priority. But despite that, and despite the fact that they've got a facility to be able to have 100% FDI in all of the areas that I just mentioned, you still find that people are reluctant to come into that sector. And why are they reluctant to come into that sector? They're reluctant to come in because while you might create aggregation at the back end, unless you also have consolidation and aggregation at the front end, you really won't have significant customers. You're still finally ending up going through a whole lot of independent and smaller size channels as far as reaching the consumer is concerned, which means that efficiencies get lost. So it has to work both in terms of the demand side as well as on the supply side together.
Point taken, Mr. Kurien. We'll leave this discussion over here, but we are going to continue this in the editions to come. Like Mr. Kurien says, the Birlas, the Tatas, the Ambanis, the Future Group, I mean a whole host of groups, and also the Tescos and the Metros are there in the cash and carry segment, but we haven't cut much ice so far. Looks like there is a lot of slip between the cup and the lip, or in this case between the fork and the farm. We will of course carry on this discussion in future editions. Thanks for watching this edition of Indian Hour.